Rick Smith,
Hello.
you broke the chains of addiction 19 years ago. And since then, you've been sober living from drugs and alcohol. And you say you did that actually by changing learned behaviors from your childhood, right?
Yes. Yep.
So, but first, 19 years is a really long time, and you don't look that old. So, you must have been quite young when you started this downward spiral.
Yeah, for me, if we were to even go back before that, grew up child of an alcoholic, saw the dysfunction on both sides of my family. And my father, when he went into his first rehab, I eventually went into my first experience of Alateen at the time. So for those that aren't familiar listening, Al-Anon, a lot of people have heard about. They actually have programs for teenagers, and that's where I fell into at that time in my life. All while this was going on, growing up in the dysfunction, seeing what my mom was dealing with, what the addict, my dad at the time, was dealing with, and then trying to come to terms of where I fall into, the dichotomy of this family of, trying to get healthier at that time.
How old were you?
So we first sat down, that was 12, 13, somewhere in there.
And your dad was just going off to rehab at that point?
He was a local, this facility is about 10, 15 minutes from where we lived at the time. So he went to a 28-day program that was inpatient.
So were you aware of his problem up until that point, or was it just like, hey, dad's leaving for a while?
Yeah. And so around the house, I would see dad acting in certain ways. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not something's up here.
Yeah.
Dad was never an abusive drunk, and that's what he was into, is just basically drinking.
Mm-hmm.
Around me, at least, my mom has different stories, but he was always, we had this built-in stereo system that my dad had, and we call him the music man. He loves all sorts of music, and so dad would, tie one on, and then he'd be thinking that he was the lead singer and, in front of 30,000 people singing his heart out in front of the stereo system. That's what I remember at a young age. Well, on the flip side of that, I did see, there was times where my mom would lock my dad out of the room, put the big chest up against the door so he couldn't get through. She would hide the keys in the freezer, so he couldn't find his keys and get in a car and drive drunk, because he did that a lot. So there was many instances growing up to where I saw certain things that mom was doing where, obviously that had an impact on me as a kid, trying to figure out, like, what's wrong with dad? Why is this happening? So I started to see that at an early age.
So she was hiding his behavior to maybe protect you and wasn't talking about what was actually happening.
She actually, it was plain as day as far as the certain situational circumstances had presented itself through what dad was doing with his drinking. But there was a point in time, I think it was around 12 or 13 years old, and mom sat me down on the couch and she literally said to me, I can't do this with your father anymore. You're basically going to have to choose who you're going to live with. And, it's a pretty grown up conversation for a young teenager at that time. And so that was kind of like the turning point where my dad saw what my mom was about to do. And he decided, maybe I need to give this a shot. And that's when the first intervention took place, around that same time.
So first intervention, as in it didn't work?
Correct. First intervention, went through rehab there, had some really close friends of his acknowledging, that he's got a problem. And he did maintain a certain length of sobriety. Those times or length, I can't remember off the top of my head. It might have been within a year's time, to where there was another relapse. And we were in a different There was a final time of going to rehab, a third and last time when he went out to Hazelden in Minnesota for a 30-day program out there. And so when we were in that house, it was an interesting time in my life because for me growing up, you know, I've got my dad actually behind me over here, and he's still my hero today. I'm 46 years old. Dad's 68. And, you know, with our relationship, him helping me with hockey, I left home at 15. So some of the things that I saw and seeing the dysfunction, there was still like this point in time, it was like it was starting to come to a head when I did move away at that year of 15, at 15 years old. And I moved to Toronto chasing my NHL hockey career. So, you know, Dad had a relapse within that. I remember certain instances of that year when I moved away from home at 15, where it was a big bummer to discover we were in Kenora, Winnipeg, way north into Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And Dad had relapsed there at a bar, and the coach had actually said for me to come and sleep with him the one night. And, you know, there was still this kind of friction, turmoil, Dad trying to figure it out.
So Mom stayed with him this whole time, supported
She
him.
did. She did. And we laugh about it today because, again, I know it's a serious topic, but at the same time, we have done so much work individually, so much work as a family. It even extends into the next generation with my brother. But when Dad went to the final treatment facility, my mom was going out there for the family program. Really what she was going out there for wasn't anything about her. It was all about to talk to the counselor on what Dad needed to fix. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody who's lived with an alcoholic or dysfunction, it spills over, and then you're dealing with what you thought was healthy and it really wasn't in a healthy manner based on enabling people or dysfunction that was carried over from what you learned from her parents.
Mm-hmm.
And so her counselor had actually said to her, hold the phone here. You know, we've got some things we need to work on with you. And so there was this beginning process of kind of Dad figuring it out for himself, Mom working on herself. And they did. I mean, she's a warrior through and through. How she stayed with my father, then me going through it, then my brother going through it. It's amazing.
Yeah.
He had to, you know, endure through all of that.
Yeah, she was made for you guys, apparently.
Yes.
Geez. So speaking of you, what had just started, it was okay. Like, how did you get into after seeing your dad destroy himself and threaten destroying your family? How did you take that first drink, and how old were you?
Yeah, so I was 15 years old. I distinctly remember being in the garage, seeing these Coors Lights that had been, I mean, it was summertime. They were out there, they were sitting in the sun. You could feel how hard the cans were from all the buildup, you know, just skunked beer. Didn't taste good at all. But I remember taking that over to my buddy's house, drank them, you know, was basically drunk. It might have been 5 or 6 beers. And so that was my first experience. The second experience was a little bit deeper than that. A bottle of Crown Royal had come back on the train from Toronto. My dad picked me up in Windsor to bring me back into Detroit. We lived at that time in Brighton, Michigan, just north of Ann Arbor by about 30 minutes, west of Detroit by 45 minutes. And it was homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
And so I left all my friends back here and got to come back, see my friends, but some guys weren't going to homecoming. So, you know, ended up getting my hands on some liquor, drank half of that bottle of Crown Royal, not understanding chase it or anything like that. Pretty sure I had alcohol poisoning. And my friend thankfully had called my parents, and my mom answered the phone, of course, really not happy with some choice words she used on the phone that night. And my dad showed up, and, you know, he's telling me to get up out of the bathtub where he found me, you know, throwing up. I couldn't get up. And my dad took me like a little infant, you know, 15-year-old boy now and carried me to the car. And that was my second experience with drinking. That season of my life at 15 years old, even though I saw Dad go through what he went through, I think for myself, I didn't really know how to handle what I was going through. Moving away from home, leaving two siblings, a younger brother, younger sister. You know, I'm 9 years older than my brother, 10 years older than my sister. Having this feeling of like I'm abandoning them because I'm going to chase my dream.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for my family, I was calling home almost every day. And this coping mechanism that, you know, started to open up the door of the Curious George with that year was, it went from beer to hard liquor to trying weed for the first time, a couple other drugs that were in there. And it was just dabbling here and there. It wasn't anything that turned into a constant, but I definitely was trying some things, and don't know if it was more from a curious standpoint, like I said, or if it was something that I was trying to cope with.
Do you feel like you had some kind of depression or like unresolved issues from your childhood that you were just trying to like quiet?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. I think depression might have been there, overwhelming sadness, just because again, my family, you know, we are super tight even today.
Mm-hmm.
So to leave my family, I know was playing in my mind. It was probably one of the most difficult things I've done at 15 years old, to move away from my family. So I know some of those things that I mentioned probably had, you know, subliminally in the back of my mind, whether it was conscious or not, it was there. And that even led into the next year after that, where it just started to unravel and precipitate even more.
Did your family know what was going on?
Dad did.
Your dad did?
Dad did. He could see right through it, right? Mom thought, you know, that's our little angel. He wouldn't do anything like that.
So was your dad a little lenient because of guilt that he had, or was he trying to whip you into shape and talk you out of this?
Oh, 100%. I mean, there was certain times in my career too, where, you know, I got to represent USA and was chosen, you know, one of the top hockey players in the United States. And when I went to that tournament, I didn't even have a focus of hockey. It was like, I'm in this country right now, you know, I'm playing for Team USA and I'm going to live it up. And so, you know, he saw it in my play. He could smell it on me. He's like, son, I know what you're doing. You know, you're about to throw away your career. And you decide you want to keep doing this. There's not a happy ending to this story, essentially, is what he said to me.
But at that age, you probably feel invincible.
That was right around 16, 17 years old. Yep.
Yeah. It ain't going to happen to me.
100%. So regardless of what Dad went through, you know, I had other people telling me the same thing, and it was just like one ear out the other, unfortunately.
So you just got used to that rhythm. You'd get wasted, feel like shit, and then come out of it, go play, and then repeat.
So the progressiveness to that, right? It went from, you know, playing with it, 16, 17, 18, then you know, 19 years old while I was playing back here, semi-pro at the time, while I was in high school, driving to Windsor, playing for a semi-professional team. And the drinking age there is 19, being in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So it was game on. I mean, I'm in the casino, I'm drinking, you know, I'm in the bars there, other places I shouldn't be. And that's when it really took a hit, because there was a season of where I made the U.S. World Junior team. So I'm going to be on like the pinnacle platform of the world in hockey. And 2 weeks later, I blew up my ACL. And so I missed the chance of going and representing the USA again at that level, which was even greater from when I represented the USA before. And so that threw me into a nasty spiral. That's how I dealt with it. I took, you know, that opportunity and was just very angry at the time. Was angry, you know, that it happened, was angry with God, and it just went into a self-destruction.
Were the other were your teammates doing the same thing? Were you like flying solo with this?
No, there was, I mean, yeah, we had a team that actually was dismantled that year. We had one of the best hockey teams on paper in North America. A lot of guys that were drafted, other guys that went on to play in the NHL, but our off ice habits were we as hard as we played super hard off the ice too.
Mm-hmm.
9, 12 guys that were, we were on the front page of the Detroit Free Press, not great for when scouts are looking at you because you are out, missing curfew and the extracurricular activities and being caught in those situations. So there was a handful of guys too that were a part of that, part of those, activities.
So at what point did this become a problem for you? I know, we know now looking back, it was a huge problem, but at that time, when was it like, what's going on here? What happened? Like, so it progressed and you were doing drugs and alcohol, and what happened? Did you start to miss practice? What was going on?
So this happened in my my first year of professional hockey. I signed my first professional contract and I was sober. And here's what happened. I had turned 21. My birthday's in July. Had a huge blowout party. My parents were up at the cottage on the Canadian side, about 4 hours away. I knew they were going to be gone that weekend. And I mean, people still talk about it today. There was a good 150 people in the house. Cops showed up the whole 9, cars going out the line out to the main road through the subdivision. It was another night where I blacked out, and at one point my uncle showed up the next day. He wanted to take me to the hospital to get my stomach pumped. That didn't happen. I recovered, but realized at that point, like, this is impacting my hockey career. So I need to check myself in. And I saw what had happened with Dad. He was the example, and he had some sobriety under him now at this point. And so when Dad came back, I said, I think I need to check myself into rehab. And I was on a plane within a few days, and I was completely sober when I went, knowing like I've just signed this contract and I need to get my shit in order, or I mean, they're going to send me back home. So went to rehab for 30 days out in Hazelden, the same last place that my dad went to. A lot of, renowned people have gone there. They do have quite the roadmap and reputation.
Yeah.
But I was sober that season, and go figure, I was having a rookie breakout season. Everything was going phenomenal for me. I think what's really hard at 21 is being around the environment, the guys. What do you do after the games? You're going out for drinks, and you're hanging out. And so they talk about you're hanging out in wet places. Eventually you're going to pick up that wet drink. And, it was about 7 months where I was sober. Now, listen, 7 months of doing it on my own. Had sponsors calling me back here, didn't seek any guidance or going to structured meetings where I was playing, just completely like cut the cord and said I could do this. And took my will back as what I did. So that led me to relapsing. Was dating a girl at the time. I remember being in her apartment, and I opened up the fridge, and the first thing I saw that my eyes went to, just like laser beams, was this drink called tequila. And so it was a beer with a tequila shot in it. And I'm like, well, I've never tried this before. Maybe I didn't get sober at the right time. So the first instinct that I had in my mind was, I'm going to call my dad. And so I called him, but it was like the relapse had already happened. It was like, no matter what Dad was going to tell me in that conversation, I was already beeline it back to the fridge. So I'm talking like, as soon as I got off the phone, he did everything in his power to try and help me. I went right to that fridge, and I think, within an hour, I'd already downed like 6 of those. And the girl that I was dating, she knew, like, okay, he's been sober. And I said, hey, it's not a big deal. I've got this thing under control. And that's how the spiral started for me. Now, the progression in a very short window, within about a month or two left of that hockey season, it went from those people who do cocaine, and I would never be like one of those people. And so I found myself trying cocaine for the first time, taking pills of ecstasy for the first time, and that was at 21 years of age. To where my relapse, they talk about this thing's just doing push-ups, waiting for you to come back, and it was true, man. It was first the drink, but the drink led to first time doing cocaine to then doing ecstasy, and I went into a spiral for a good 3 years, at least 2 years.
Did your dad have a mentor after he became sober, or was he doing it all on his own?
No, he did. Yep. For us, the program of AA was something that my dad was going to meetings. He had, people that they would go out to eat. They would go to each other's homes. They would do things with each other. So there was always guidance and that fellowship of others who were, of course, like-minded and wanting to stay sober. So when I came back that year, there's more to that story because it's actually in the beginning of my book on behavior change, but I described this moment in time where at the end of my second season playing pro, so now I'm 22 years old, fast forward in the story, I specifically asked for a trade to be in New Orleans. And anybody who's been to New Orleans knows that that city does not sleep.
Mm-hmm.
You can find a place to go party at 3 o'clock in the morning. So Bourbon Street was where you would typically find me. And I was having a great season once again. Beginning of the season was going well. Had, NHL teams looking at me at that point. Production was going well, but my body couldn't keep up to what I was doing with it. Started getting into cocaine more heavily than I ever had been. Mm-hmm. Got into ecstasy more than I ever had been. And of course, the drinking was on a whole nother level. At the end of that season, the coach brought me into the general manager's room and they said, "Look, Rick, we're going to have to release you and let you go." And, I played dumb. I'm like, "Well, what's the problem?" "Well, your off-ice habits are the problem." And so I said, okay, not knowing what I was going to do. I packed my gear, packed my stall, said goodbye to the guys, grabbed my things. And my coach at the time was walking me out to my car and he was like, "Look, my last name's Smith and my nickname was Smitty when I played." So he said, "Smitty, listen, there's some guys who do this off the ice and there's some guys that can't, and you're not one of them." And in that moment, man, I was like, "Ooh, I'm angry right now." Like I wanted to just turn around and knock him out, Mm-hmm. But, I've shared this story so many times now, like it's the best thing. They got to do what's best for the team, For sure. And I wasn't showing up at my capacity that I knew that I could be because of what I was doing to myself. So first and foremost, you do what's best for the team. Second is, he was 100%, I needed to get my shit together. Unfortunately, I didn't. The team went into playoffs, and one of my good friends that I would drink and drug with, I didn't know if they were going to make it through the first round. They were asking me why I was still in town at the condo that they had me in, and I gave them a lie that my parents were on a cruise, so I couldn't get back into my house, back at home, and wanted to keep the circus train going, essentially. Mm-hmm. And so they lost out in the first round. My buddy got traded halfway through the season. He was from Pensacola, that hockey team, and I had my best friend at that time who was playing in Pensacola, and the season was over for them. So what I did was I waited for my buddy. We packed up our stuff. We headed to Pensacola, Florida, and the party continued. So that went on for a few months. Now, if you were to flip over to my family and their side of it, my dad's calling the morgues. He's calling police stations. My brother's having nightmares of his brother dying. Yeah, it'll make me, it doesn't matter how many times I share it. You don't know the pain as an addict of what they're going through from the other side because you're so selfish in what you're doing. But my brother thought at one point my car rolled over, caught on fire, like all the stories he shared, from that time. And then to let my mom know that, and to let the whole family know that I was okay, my buddy was like, "Listen, you haven't talked to your family at all, like in the last couple of months? I said, no. And out of shame, guilt, being embarrassed from those conversations. So what I did was I sent a card on Mother's Day to my mom to let her know that I was okay and I wished her a happy Mother's Day. First of all, thank God there wasn't the smartphones back then, during that time frame. But I basically sold my soul. I stopped paying my car payments. My money was gone in the bank from playing. I was selling my belongings, my personal things, just to get drugs and alcohol to numb out. I was sleeping on my buddy's couch. Like, I didn't have my own place. So here I am in Pensacola, Florida. And one morning, after an all-nighter of partying, I remember sitting on the beach. Here we are at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I didn't, beyond comprehension of being drunk. But I remember this moment because I remember looking out into the water at the horizon. The sun, was coming up from behind, and I could see the waves moving. And I remember thinking to myself, like, is this what life's all about? Am I really happy right now? It was that small little light bulb of questioning, probably my spirit speaking to me and not Rick, the loud guy on the other side.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment where I'm like, man, it's time to go home and face the music. So I ended up going back home, tail between my legs, packed up the rest of my belongings that I had. And my buddies lived in Canada at the time. They drove me back to my place. And I'll never forget that day, though, because when I ring the doorbell and my dad opened up the door, my mom was on the phone in the office. I mean, I see it. My brother was at the top of the stairs, and my sister was coming through the hallway. And now, mind you, like, I'm tan at that time. My hair was platinum white because I'd always dyed my hair back in those days, like a complete beach bum. But they were looking at a ghost, it seemed like, or a hologram. Like, is this really him? And so that started the process of, I'm here, but I'm not completely ready to get sober yet. I still hadn't been through enough pain. After getting released from a hockey team, after selling my soul, having no money, here I am. My parents let me in, and at a certain point, the addiction took over, and now being released from a hockey team, having to tell my friends, going through all of that, my addiction just completely took over for another solid year, to the point where my dad helped me get my first house, got me a land contract, and said, it's time to grow up. You're not being a role model for your brother and sister, and we're not allowing this in the house anymore.
Were you working? Like, how were you going to pay for that?
Yep. So what happened was I said, well, we grew up, I would say, spoiled. Mom and dad being, in the mortgage industry, that lent, us living a certain lifestyle. So, dad helping me out there. They took me in at the mortgage company. I started to have to earn my way. It was 100% commission. They weren't giving me any handouts, so I had to earn my way. So from that point forward, it was time to grow up. And I started to grow up in the business world a little bit, started to make some money. I had my first house at, 22 years old, more forcefully than anything. But my dad said to me, I'm not paying this for you. This is on you. So through that year, established my credit. I was actually engaged to someone else before the wife that I have now. And there was, just one of those nights where everything blew up all at once. She ended up, through that process, giving the ring back, said, I can't do this with you anymore. This is a crazy lifestyle.
So wait, you're working at the mortgage company. You've got the house your dad put you up in, and you're still blowing it on drugs and alcohol?
100%.
Even after you had this epiphany at the water?
The little light bulb moment. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
So she's like, no more?
That was another moment, right? But it was in that moment. That was the moment where when she gave the ring back, and I remember, man, that was another I shouldn't have been driving moment. by the way, a lot of blackouts, being in cars, not remembering where I parked the next morning. There was definitely a being, which I choose for myself, to God. And there's more to that story, especially with what happened to my dad being pronounced dead on arrival through his stories. He was literally dead and was brought back, had an afterlife experience. But for me, I mean, I don't know why. I don't know why, but I'm grateful that I was never in a car accident and hurt somebody, because
It's
there was
crazy that you got through all that with nothing like that happening.
there's a cross that used to hang, and I always had it on there, and I had it on there for a purpose. And I would always say, God, I don't know what's going to happen here, but please just get me home. That would be my prayer. It's like my foxhole prayer. It wasn't about, I want my life to be amazing. It's just get me home and don't let me hurt anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So, when she gave the ring back, it was in that moment where she left it. She went back home. She was living with me at the time. And I remember dropping to my knees and just saying, God, help me. And I picked up the phone to my mom. And I know it's different from having a father to now seeing it with my wife and our son and the mama bear, right? I'm so grateful that mom was practicing her recovery program of what she went through with dad and now having to face it with me, because the first person I called was my mom. I was figuring I was going to get the easy handout. It's okay, honey. Let's go shopping. Let's go get something to eat. And this will all be fine. And we'll scoop it under the rug or sweep it under the rug. She walked through the door. She sat down on the couch and she looked me square in the eyes. And she said, look, there's two options here when I leave this house. And the first one is you can stay on this path and you can keep doing what you're doing, and that's probably going to end and lead in death. She said, or you know what you need to do. We've spent, 30 grand on you to go to recovery. The people to reach out to if you wanted to tonight to get sober again. So those are your two options. I don't know what you're going to do when I leave here, but you know what you need to do if you want to live that path and still be here and not dead. She walked out that door, and when she talks about her story and that, she remembers just shaking, tears running down her face. Ooh, still gets me today.
So she didn't give you an ultimatum, and she didn't make the decision for you, which had to have ripped her to shreds.
And the reason why I can feel that is seeing my 5-year-old and just knowing like the love of a child, right? And not knowing what your son's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
So thankfully, when she left, that was the best thing. She didn't enable me. If anyone who's listening to this, don't enable the addict.
And as the addict, don't expect somebody else to save you.
100%. 100%.
You make the call. And
I did. And one of the books that I had, my 24-hour reading book, I opened it up and I made a call, and then I made another call. And then a real good friend of my parents, he took me on and sponsored me, took me under his wing. And it went like this for, I don't know how many Tuesdays, but we'd go out to dinner. He'd take me to a meeting. We'd go out to dinner. He'd take me to a meeting. And I'm telling you, like, there was a part of me now at this point in my life where I knew hockey was gone for the moment in time. I just needed to get my life back in order. Like, I wanted to love Rick again. I wanted to be sober. I wanted the serenity that I saw at the tables at some of these old timers with long-term sobriety.
Yeah.
And so I was doing the work. I was going to 3 meetings a day. I was doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Started to incorporate some things that were filling the void with fitness. Has always been a part of my life, part of what I do now. But that just took on a whole nother level. I didn't have just one sponsor. I had 3 sponsors at the time. And it turned out from wanting to die, like literally had the envision of this big tree where I used to live. I'm like, I'm done with this. I'm just going to go 100 miles an hour and smack this tree and just end it. And suicide was an option at a point in my life, to where now, or at that moment, when I was in my first year of sobriety, I started to love myself again. I started to see changes. People were telling me they were seeing changes in me that I didn't recognize yet. So I just continued to do the same thing that was helping me get sober. And now continuing on through that maintenance. And now, actually, from what you saw on the website, which I have to update, but I've got 21 years. February will be 22 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So you didn't go to another rehab or a treatment. You called on a sponsor and pulled
I,
mentors into the picture, and that's how you moved forward through this?
I did. Yep. It's like my mom said, you know, you've gone to enough meetings, you've spent the education, or we spent the education on you going. So it's not like you don't have the education. We have an
Right.
excuse now. This is a choice, 100% choice at this point. And she was right. And I chose to call somebody that had some good, probably, I think Bob at that time he's still around today, and we still talk, and we're family friends with them, but he was probably about 10 years sober at that time, and he took me under his wing.
So drugs and alcohol weren't the problem, right? It had you were Yeah. So
I mean, if you want to really throw into the mix of that transparency, it was the strip joints, it was the sex, there was, I would go on binges with eating. I mean, there were so many things. An addiction is addiction, right? I mean, just name it. You put a bag of potato chips in front of me at that time, I would have crushed them. If it was a thing of Oreos, like, I would have crushed the Oreos. So
mhm.
it didn't matter what you were putting in front of me. If I could get that endorphin hit that made me feel good for a short period of time, I was chasing that again.
So when you went into treatment, did they address the mental health aspect of it, or was it more so focused on the addiction, which doesn't set you up for long-term success?
Yeah, I'm grateful that the psychology behind it, we did have some intense deep dives into the mental conditioning side of that, understanding how the brain works from one side to the other, the pleasure sensories to what the actual alcohol and drugs were doing to the brain, like visual pictures on how that's impacting the brain from a healthy brain to someone who's been using for a number of years, and how those neurotransmitters are now not activated or connecting anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at all this going, wow, like, this is really interesting. And at one point, I started to play back on that when I first got sober again, because, like, I still have the reams of paper of my discharge papers out of rehab. I still have the things that I needed to work on that my counselor, we had so many sessions while I was there. She obviously got to identify a lot of things that I needed to work on. As I continued to move through that and get sober, there was things that was triggering me back in rehab that I learned from that my memory had absorbed, thankfully, to where I was then taking that, and it was developing, whether it was a new habit, a new skill now at that point, because I'd been practicing something that was more healthy. So I was literally taking this side over here from all the negative stuff, from those type of sensories, and then plugging in these good things that were now impacting my brain from a healthy perspective.
Did you ever think that, man, I'm too far gone, I messed this up, I just screwed my whole life up, I've burned every bridge, how is anybody going to welcome me back in? What am I going to do? Or was it just that switch flipped? What happened?
Yeah, I'm grateful that I've had the parents that I've had through this, and especially with what they went through, because mom didn't enable me. Certainly dad did not enable me. But they helped me. When they saw I wanted help for myself, they were 100% support system.
Okay.
They were cheering me on. They were cheerleaders. And my mom just said, get a year under your belt, and then a year happened, then 2 years, then 3 years. And I ended up meeting my wife after my third year in recovery, which is still very early, and had a chance to play professional hockey again in recovery, which was pretty cool. That happened a couple times for me. Because I still wasn't ready, but I also wanted to see, could I play this game of hockey that I was so messed up on for so long, play it sober.
Yeah.
So I remember making that phone call to my dad when I decided to come out of retirement, a good 3-4 years later. I hadn't played hockey, just in beer leagues, around here, and had the opportunity. And he's like, look, You have a really solid program under your belt. All it's going to take is for when you're back at your house, you're going to meetings, you're talking to people in the program, and had a great season. It was an awesome experience. Played with some guys that I looked up to when, I was growing up that played in the NHL, had an opportunity to play with them, and it was a great season. So we talk about this story of, redemption or redeeming yourself. Like for what I went through to where I took myself to, I call it the depths of hell. And some of the places that you would have saw me in, you would have said, what is this kid doing? Being in crack houses and dope houses and you name it, to then getting a shot to play professional hockey again sober. And now, mind you, like my dad would always say to me, look back at the time in your life and what was happening. And then when you think that something is a coincidence, it's probably not, because with 2 games left in the season, here's the wild thing that I'll share on this. Had I not come out of it, had I not gotten sober, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity. I'd probably be dead, first of all. Second is I got sober, had the opportunity to play again, but with 2 games left in that hockey season, I got introduced to my now wife. So had I not played again, I wouldn't have met her.
Sure.
So she met me in recovery, or she met me sober. She wasn't in recovery, but got married in sobriety. As the story unfolds and goes, we've been married for almost 18 years. My son, who's now 5, has never seen dad drink or drug. And so the reason why I wrote that book on learned behaviors impacting the next generation is he's the reason why I birthed that short read, because we are impacting our kids, the next generation, through what we're showing them, those learned behaviors, whether they're good or they're bad.
And it doesn't matter how old they are, even if it's if you've got a 3-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old, if you are expressing those behaviors to your children, they still look at you as a role model. So if dad's doing it, even though I'm a grown adult and I know better, it just becomes normal.
Yep. And that normalization, I mean, it's, I just was talking with a mom who I work with 2 of her boys, one of them being 21, other one's 15, another one's 9, but they basically cut ties with their dad, who 3 years now they've had no interaction with dad, but he's still out there doing his thing in California. And they saw that, they recognized it's not healthy. A couple of them are choosing not to engage in some of those things, which again, there's probably some underlining things there that can be dealing with, dad not being in the picture 100%. But at the same time, it's like, even when it's our own parents or loved ones or extended family members or cohorts at work, whatever it might be, it's my belief that now seeing this through and through from both sides of the fence, people do show us of what not to be as well, So as tough as that might be when it's a loved one, it's also something that where we kind of, if we can step back, take the emotion out of it for a moment, just to try and grasp, like, what am I supposed to be learning in this experience right now? There's more to that story that you can, pull from that as far as an experience. And again, I'm not saying that that's not a super challenging experience for boys that don't have their fathers, but it makes me more like take ownership over myself. I have a bigger responsibility as a man to make sure that I need to be doing what he is going to be emulating or think is the correct thing. And believe you me, I am not perfect. My wife will tell you that. Okay. I'm not trying to be a perfect man, but at the same time, I've had her thank me over and over again for my sobriety, for what I'm doing with him and raising him, and, just being a part of this household, because there's the other side to it as well.
Do you worry ever that you'll fall back into it?
For myself, no. And I know in certain circles you can never say never, but if you know me on a deep level, my day-to-day routine, let me just give you an example. This is how I wake up every morning. I wake up, I don't go to my phone to Instagram right away or Facebook. Of course, I turn the alarm off because that's where my phone or my alarm is on my phone.
Mm-hmm.
I go up and I mineralize my body. So I take some Celtic sea salt, put it on my tongue, let it dissolve. I've got my hydrogen water bottle doing its thing, wait 3 minutes, get that in me. The coffee pot's going, and then I wait until the coffee's done. I put in a teaspoon of coconut oil. That gets me started to get into my 3 readings for the day, and then puts me into meditation and prayer. That's just to start my day. And if I don't do that routine, I feel for the day, because I'm a guy who I got to work out every day. It's part of filling the void for me. It's my holistic medicine, essentially. So when you ask me that question, for me, it's a serious, hard no, like non-negotiable. I've experienced what it's like to go back out. I got into things that I never thought I'd get into. And I know if I were to go back out, first of all, my wife's not going to let me in the house. She's going to probably take custody of my son.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll probably end up, like my sponsor said to me, my first sponsor, you'll be in a sane asylum, prison, or dead. Those are your 3 options. And so that still rings true in my mind. He is always there from almost 22 years ago of saying that to me. And it's true, because unfortunately, through this process and my journey of recovery, I've had friends die from this. They've left 3 kids behind, a wife, being at funerals of other friends, guys that stood up in my wedding. So that's, I hold myself to a standard of what some of my clients have said that some people just can't wrap their head around. And that's where I'm at. Some people have told me I should have been a Navy SEAL, maybe, but I just feel like for where I'm at, in my recovery, it's not even an option for me today, because I know what's going to happen, and I don't want something to happen to my son.
So it's always a thought, though. It's always in your head.
It is. Don't get me wrong. Summertime, you see a commercial. There's that bead of sweat going down a Corona bottle with the lime in it. Someone sitting on a beach. That whole marketing spiel.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, man, that looks good. And then boom, I just go right to, where'd that take you to? Okay, right. Yep. Okay. Not doing that, So yeah, do the thoughts come and go 100%? But something else I learned a long time ago that was a great saying from my longtime sponsor. He said, look, we're not responsible for the thoughts that do come into our head, but we are responsible for what we do with those thoughts.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. You have replaced a lot of those meetings. So some of these sponsors, when they go to the meetings, they, everybody talks about how long they've been sober. I've been sober 22 years. I've been sober 25 years, and they're still going to meetings. So do you feel like, are you still going to meetings?
100%.
Oh, you do?
I do.
Oh, so that's a huge.
Here's the kicker. It's not because I want to drink. Look at this is, as we talked about the addiction, just name it, right? If it's the eating, it's the sex, it's the drinking, it's gambling, name the addiction. It's just a byproduct, because the problem is up here, right? If I'm not getting this healthy, and if I'm not doing the daily maintenance of my routine, mineralizing, prayer, meditation, right? Working out, this is part of it. I'm still going to meetings 21 years later. And it's not because I want to drink. It's because I gain those meetings every time I go to. It does not matter if it's someone who's just become sober and he's got 6 or 8 months. If I can just gain this little nugget, something that somebody gives me, and I'm like, that's what I needed to hear this morning. This is why I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, because my meetings are at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are, doing their deal on a Friday night. Here I am waking up. I'm getting ready, because now my son says to me at 5 years old, Dad, how was the meeting?
Aww.
So there's a sense of accountability for myself that Dad needs to go and do what he needs to do. Now, on the flip side of that, there's people sitting in those seats, because I know when I first came in, I wanted what that person had across the table from me that had good long-term sobriety. So when I show up to a meeting and people want to stand around and talk afterwards, fellowship, there's certain questions. There's people that come up and they want to talk to you. What are you doing? How are you maintaining this sobriety? And so it's not just about Rick wanting to stay sober anymore, which I do 100% every day. I thank God that I get another opportunity. Show me your will, take my will away from me, and let me be a steward with this thing called sobriety. Is I'm also giving back to the program of what saved my life at the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So there's a certain level of accountability to the community.
Yep. I'll give you an example. Yesterday morning, a friend from the program sent me a message saying, "Hey, Paul has 3 years on Friday." Well, I know what that means. I'm showing up because I want to see Paul get his 3-year token.
Yeah. So support, you become a family.
100%. It's a family. It's my my family that I thought was sitting at the bar at those stools, they're just feeding a bunch of lies and living this facade of a lifestyle. That's not my family. And quite honestly, a lot of those people are out of my life now today.
So you did have to cut those people out?
I did, the majority of them. There are some that are still friends regardless, just because I think it's probably difficult, especially when you're still out there drinking, whatever level that might be. It's different for everybody, but to have to look in the mirror because this guy standing in front of you sober, and maybe in the back of your mind, you're thinking, man, I've got some, maybe I should be sober. Maybe I got some things I need to deal with. And so, yeah, my wife just left. I mean, I'm not a big fan, just speaking personally, of Halloween, but she said, "Hey, did you notice we didn't get invited to any Halloween parties?" I'm like, I don't care. I don't,
Yeah,
that's
thank you.
exactly 100%, 100%.
Right.
That's not my life anymore.
Good. So it's not just leaving the bottle on the shelf or passing on the party that the drugs are going to be at. It's a mind, body, spirit, energy kind of thing. So you're fueling your body, because your thoughts are only going to be as good as the fuel that you put into yourself. So it's not, you can't just heal yourself from the addiction by walking away from the bottle. You have to actually heal what led you to pick up the bottle.
Yep. Yeah.
And that's for a lifetime.
100%. So, I'm certified as a sports nutritionist. I've been working with people since 2009, from Olympic athletes to professional athletes, college athletes, workout enthusiasts, high school athletes, you name it. Always the conversation, regardless of somebody being an addict or not, is how are you treating yourself with food? Because that has a carryover effect on everything we do. From, that's a whole nother interview, but
Yeah.
you've got some things that you've learned on too, just as far as what happens when we do put food into our mouth and how that's going to impact our genetic makeup, to the cell structures, to how we think. Yeah, and that's something too. As my 5-year-old's getting older, there's a lot of things that I'm teaching him what's healthy, what's not. He always wants to work out with Dad in the garage now. I'm helping him with meditation. When we're up at the cottage and we're sitting up and watching the sunrise at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, and it's bouncing off the water, just being in that form of meditation and just being quiet with no stimulus from phones or TVs or pads or any of that. It's a complete holistic approach that I have to life now, because again, if I'm not doing all of these things, I'm not going to be the best version of myself.
Yeah. Well, I'm thankful for everything that you've been through and everything that you're doing now. This gives a lot of hope to somebody who isn't quite sure what to do to take that first step.
Well, I appreciate you having me on here for your listeners. And if I can just say one last thing to those listening or seeing this is, you're hearing from a guy that, again, lost it all. I've gained it all back and then some. It wasn't overnight. It was processed, but I was willing to do the work. And I had some people in my life that literally scraped me off the floor and took me under their wing. And there are people out there like that they will open their arms up in their homes to you, and they will do whatever it takes to help you. And it's just identifying first and foremost, like, yeah, you know what? I got a problem. This isn't manageable anymore. And once you make that first decision, instead of being in denial, that's when the light bulb, you come out of that darkness. And again, you go into darkness, there's always this little shed of light. And once that transformation starts to happen, it's game on and you'll never look back.